I am currently watching a live stream of my mother-in-law, Gwendolyn, popping a $3,000 bottle of champagne to celebrate kicking me out of the family. She is laughing, wearing the diamonds she thinks she inherited, telling her friends that I'm likely sleeping in a gutter in rural Georgia. She has no idea that I am watching this from a glass penthouse in London, or that the signature I just put on this legal document is the detonator that will blow her entire stolen life to smithereens. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. It had been 7 days since we put Cameron in the ground. You would think a house of this size, 20,000 square feet of marble, velvet, and mahogany, would feel empty after the owner died, but it felt suffocating. The air inside the mansion was thick, not with grief, but with a weird, vibrating tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was the kind of atmosphere you feel in a courtroom right before a verdict is read, not in a home where a widow is supposed to be mourning. I was sitting in the corner of the secondary living room, the one we rarely used because Gwendolyn said the light there was unflattering for her complexion. I had wrapped myself in a black cashmere shawl that Cameron had bought me for our second anniversary. It smelled like cedar and that specific pipe tobacco he used to smoke in secret. And honestly, breathing that scent in was the only thing keeping me from screaming. I traced the pattern on the fabric with my thumb, over and over, until the friction started to burn my skin. I could hear them in the main hall, Gwendolyn and her daughter, Sabrina. They weren't crying. They weren't sitting in silence. They were directing the catering staff. I heard the clink of silverware and the sharp staccato rhythm of Gwendolyn's heels on the floor tiles. My brain wouldn't stop racing. Why were they organizing a dinner? Who was coming? Cameron had been dead for a week, and they were worrying about whether the polished silver was smudge-free. I wanted to go out there and yell at them. I wanted to flip a table, but I didn't. I stayed frozen on that beige sofa because I knew exactly what Gwendolyn would do if I made a scene. She wouldn't yell back. She would just look at me with those ice blue eyes, tilt her head like she was looking at a confused golden retriever, and ask if I needed a sedative. She would turn my grief into hysteria. She would make me the crazy one. So I sat there, making myself small, waiting for the axe to fall, because I knew, deep down in my gut, that they were just waiting for the legal permission to erase me. The heavy oak doors to the living room swung open, and the sound made me jump so hard I bit my tongue. I tasted copper. It wasn't Gwendolyn. It was Sabrina. My sister-in-law was 26, beautiful in that sharp, angular way that money buys, and she was dressed like she was going to the Met Gala. She wore a black silk dress that hugged every curve, sheer stockings, and enough diamond jewelry to pay off a mortgage. "Vanessa," she said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried that bored, nasal tone she used whenever she had to speak to the help. "Mother is waiting in the library. Mr. Sullivan is here." Mr. Sullivan. The lawyer. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The reading of the will. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky and unreliable. I tried to smooth down my skirt, suddenly conscious of how I looked. I hadn't washed my hair in 3 days. I was wearing a simple black dress from a department store, no jewelry except my wedding band. Standing next to Sabrina, I felt like a smudge of dirt on a pristine countertop. "I'm coming," I whispered. "Oh, honey," Sabrina said, leaning against the doorframe and looking me up and down with a pitiful smile. "Don't rush on our account. Take a minute to fix whatever is happening with your hair. We want you to look presentable for Mr. Sullivan. It's a formal occasion after all." I felt the heat rush to my cheeks. I wanted to say that my husband died, that I didn't care about my hair, that this wasn't a fashion show. But the words got stuck in my throat. If I snapped at her, she would tell Gwendolyn I was being difficult. They had been building a case against my stability for years. "I'm fine," I managed to say, walking past her. "Suit yourself," she hummed, pushing off the doorframe. "We just want what's best for you, Vanessa. You look so tired. Maybe after this is all sorted, you can finally get some rest. The way she said rest sounded ominous, like she was suggesting I be put down like a sick horse. I walked down the long, echoing hallway toward the library, my mind spiraling. What if Cameron didn't leave a will? What if he left everything to them and I had to beg them for money to buy groceries? No, Cameron wouldn't do that. He loved me. He promised to protect me. But he had been so sick at the end, so out of it. Had they made him sign something? Had they whispered poison in his ear while I was sleeping in the chair next to his hospital bed? I rubbed my sweaty palms on my dress and pushed open the library doors. The library was Gwendolyn's throne room. It was 2 stories high, filled with books nobody read, and smelled of lemon polish and old money. Gwendolyn was sitting in the high-backed leather wing chair behind Cameron's desk. That hit me like a physical slap. That was Cameron's chair. She'd already claimed it. She looked up as I entered. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my father's car, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, flawless chignon. Her makeup was perfect. Not a smudge of mascara, not a hint of a red nose. She looked powerful. "Sit down, Vanessa," Gwendolyn said, gesturing to the small, uncomfortable wooden chair opposite the desk. She and Sabrina, who had glided in behind me to sit on the velvet sofa, were comfortable. I was placed in the interrogation seat. Mr. Sullivan was standing by the window, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. He was a good man, I thought. He had been Cameron's attorney for a decade, but when he turned to look at me, he didn't smile. He didn't offer a nod of reassurance. He looked sick. His face was pale, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and terror that made my stomach drop through the floor. Why was he looking at me like that? Was it that bad? Was I getting nothing? "Good afternoon, ladies," Mr. Sullivan said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I am here to execute the last will and testament of Cameron Vance. The document was finalized and notarized 6 months ago." 6 months ago. That was right after the diagnosis, when we still thought we had time. "Let's get on with it, Arthur," Gwendolyn said, checking her diamond watch. "It's been a long week and we all need closure." "Of course," Sullivan said. He sat down at the edge of the desk, avoiding Gwendolyn's glare. He opened the briefcase with trembling fingers. The sound of the latches clicking open echoed in the silence like gunshots. I gripped the edges of my wooden chair so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself, trust Cameron. He said he would take care of things. He said, whatever happens, trust me. But looking at Gwendolyn's predatory smile and Sullivan's shaking hands, trust felt like a very fragile thing. Sullivan unfolded the heavy legal paper. He adjusted his glasses, took a breath, and began to read. The legalese washed over me. Being of sound mind. Hereby bequeath. It all sounded like noise. I just watched his mouth moving, waiting for my name. To my mother, Gwendolyn Vance, Sullivan read, his voice gaining a little strength. I leave the entirety of my shares and controlling interest in Stellar Industries, along with all associated assets, physical properties, and the full rights to the family estate located at 1004 High Court Drive. Gwendolyn let out a breath that sounded like a moan of pleasure. She didn't even try to hide it. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back. My boy, she whispered. He knew. He knew I was the only one who could keep the legacy alive. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. The company? The house? Everything? Stellar Industries was worth millions. The house alone was worth $10 million. Cameron had built that company from the ground up. He had bought this house for us. And, Sullivan continued, I leave the collection of vintage automobiles and the vacation property in Aspen to my sister, Sabrina Vance. Sabrina actually squealed, a high-pitched, childish sound of delight. The Aspen house? Oh my God, and the Porsche? I get the Porsche? Yes, Miss Vance, Sullivan said quietly. The entire collection. Sabrina clapped her hands together. Finally, I can sell that ugly Jaguar and get the G-Wagon I wanted. I sat there, completely silent. I felt like I was dissolving. He left them everything. The business, the home, the cars, the vacation spots. What was left? Was there anything left? My mind started doing frantic math. Maybe there was a life insurance policy, a savings account. I didn't need millions. I just needed enough to rent an apartment, enough to not be homeless. Gwendolyn leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. She looked at me, and her expression was one of pure, toxic pity. "Oh, Vanessa, dear," she purred, "don't look so stricken. Cameron was a pragmatist. He knew you were never suited for the burden of business. He knew the stress of managing an estate would just break you. He did this to protect you from responsibility. To protect me. By leaving me penniless? I wanted to vomit. I wanted to stand up and scream that I had been the one changing his bandages, the one holding his hand during chemo while they were at brunch. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the betrayal. "Is that all, Arthur?" Gwendolyn asked, sounding bored now that she had secured the crown jewels. "I assume there's some token gesture for the widow?" She said widow like it was a dirty word, like parasite. Sullivan cleared his throat again. He looked down at the paper, then up at me. His eyes were watering. "To my wife, Vanessa," he read, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I leave the property known as the Whispering Pines Homestead, located in rural Georgia." Silence. Then a snort. It started with Sabrina. She covered her mouth, but the giggle escaped. Then Gwendolyn joined in, a low, throaty chuckle that grew into a full-blown laugh. "Whispering Pines?" Gwendolyn gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "You mean that rotting shack his grandfather bought for hunting 50 years ago? Does that thing even have a roof?" "It is. A standing structure," Sullivan stammered. "Oh, this is rich," Sabrina laughed, shaking her head. "He left her the literal dump, the one in the middle of nowhere, with the ticks and the hillbillies." My face was burning so hot I thought my skin might peel off. Whispering Pines. I vaguely remembered Cameron mentioning it once, years ago. He said it was a ruin, a place nobody went. Why? Why would he do this? Was this a joke? Was this his way of telling me from beyond the grave that I was worthless to him? That I belonged in the trash? "Here is the deed," Sullivan said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk toward me. He didn't look at the other two. He pushed it toward me with an urgency that confused me. "And the keys." He placed a single rusted iron key on the mahogany desk. It looked ancient. It looked like a prop from a horror movie. I reached out and took the key. It was cold and heavy. Is there any money?" I asked. My voice was so small I barely heard it myself. I hated myself for asking. I sounded like a beggar, but I had $40 in my checking account. Sullivan looked at the paper again. He swallowed hard. "The will states," Sullivan said, reading strictly from the text, "that prior to his passing, Mr. Vance liquidated all personal savings and investment accounts to settle outstanding obligations within Stellar Industries and to secure the assets bequeathed to his mother and sister." He paused. "There is no cash balance remaining to distribute." Gwendolyn clapped her hands together once, a sharp sound of finality. "See?" she beamed. "Brilliant! Even at the end, he was thinking of the company. He poured everything back into the business to ensure Sabrina and I would be secure. He knew the liquidity was needed to maintain the estate." She looked at me with a triumphant, condescending smile. "It's actually quite touching, Vanessa. He sacrificed your little cash inheritance to make sure the family legacy, the real family, remained strong. He knew you wouldn't know how to invest it anyway. You would have just spent it on trinkets." I felt the blood drain from my head. 0. He had left me $0. He had emptied our accounts, to bolster the company for his mother. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The betrayal was absolute. The man I had loved, the man I had nursed, had systematically stripped me of every safety net to make his mother richer. "So," Sabrina said, standing up and stretching like a satisfied cat, "Mom gets the empire, I get the toys, and Vanessa gets a shack in the swamp. I'd say that wraps things up nicely." Sullivan stood up abruptly. He shoved the papers into his briefcase. He looked like he was about to have a panic attack. "I will leave the copies of the transfer documents here," he said, placing a stack of folders on the desk near Gwendolyn. "By accepting these bequests, you assume full ownership and all associated responsibilities, effective immediately." Yes, leave them," Gwendolyn waved a hand dismissively. "You can go, Arthur. We have a dinner to prepare for." Sullivan looked at me one last time. "Mrs. Vance," he said, nodding to me, I wish you luck." And then he practically ran out of the room. He didn't look back. He fled as if the house was on fire. I sat there clutching the rusty key, while Gwendolyn and Sabrina smiled at each other across the desk. They had won. They had won everything, and I was just a piece of debris left over from the crash. "Well," Gwendolyn said, turning her cold eyes on me, "that settles that. Since this house is now legally mine and you are no longer relevant to its operation, I think it's time we discussed your living arrangements." My stomach turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "that I want you out." "Out?" I repeated. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a stone I was trying to swallow. "Gwendolyn, it's 7 o'clock at night. It's starting to storm. You can't be serious." Gwendolyn sighed, a long, weary exhalation that suggested I was being incredibly unreasonable. She stood up and smoothed the front of her dress. "Vanessa, please don't make this difficult. We have guests arriving in 2 hours for the memorial dinner. High-profile guests, investors, people who matter to the future of the company." She walked around the desk and stood in front of me, her hands clasped. "Look at you," she said softly, tilting her head. "You're a mess. You've been moping around in those rags for a week. You're depressing the staff. You're depressing us. And frankly, having you here, it's just confusing for everyone. You don't fit in this world, honey. You never did. Cameron tried to mold you, bless his heart, but we all saw how uncomfortable you were." My fingernails dug into my palms. "I lived here for 5 years. This is my home." "Was," Sabrina corrected from the sofa. She was inspecting her manicure. "It was your home when my brother was alive to prop you up. Now it's my mother's house, and she doesn't want a roommate." "It's for your own good," Gwendolyn added, her voice dripping with that poisonous sweetness. "We're ripping the Band-Aid off. If we let you stay, you'll just wallow here, haunting the hallways like a ghost. You need a fresh start, a reality check. You need to go to that country house and find yourself. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet without a rich husband holding your hand." "I have nowhere to go tonight," I said, my voice rising. Panic was starting to claw at my throat. "I have $40 in my bank account because Cameron emptied everything. I can't even get a hotel room." Gwendolyn's face hardened instantly. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the steel beneath. "That is not my problem. You are a grown woman. Figure it out." She snapped her fingers at Sabrina. "Get her things." Sabrina jumped up, grinning. "Way ahead of you." "Wait," I said, standing up. "My clothes, my jewelry." "Everything in this house is part of the estate," Gwendolyn said coldly. "The jewelry Cameron bought you was purchased with company funds, which means it belongs to the company, which means it belongs to me. You can take what you brought into this marriage." I stared at her. "I brought nothing." "Exactly," Sabrina chirped. She was already at the door. "Be right back." I stood there, trembling. I wanted to fight. I wanted to grab the heavy crystal paperweight on the desk and smash it through the window. But I was paralyzed by the sheer efficiency of their cruelty. They had planned this. They had discussed it over breakfast while I was crying in my room. Minutes later, I heard a thumping sound coming from the grand staircase. Thump, thump, crash. I ran out into the foyer. Sabrina was at the top of the stairs. At the bottom, lying on the marble floor, was my old suitcase, the one I had moved in with 5 years ago. It was a cheap blue fabric thing with a broken zipper. It had burst open on impact. My old college sweatshirts, a few pairs of jeans, and some underwear were scattered across the pristine floor. "Oops," Sabrina called down, not looking sorry at all. "It was heavy. I slipped." Gwendolyn walked up behind me. She looked at the mess on her floor with disgust. "Pick it up," she ordered, "and get out, now." I fell to my knees. I didn't have a choice. I started shoving my clothes back into the broken suitcase. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get the zipper to align. I felt like an animal, a scavenger picking through trash while the queens of the castle watched from above. "The guests will be here soon," Gwendolyn said, checking her watch again. "I don't want them seeing this." I grabbed a handful of socks and jammed them in. I didn't fold anything. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to escape their eyes. I managed to force the zipper halfway up, leaving a sleeve of a gray hoodie hanging out like a tongue. I stood up, dragging the suitcase. It was heavy, heavier than I remembered. "Goodbye, Vanessa," Gwendolyn said. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer a handshake. She just pointed to the door. I walked to the massive double doors. The wood was dark and polished. I reached for the handle, then stopped. I turned back to look at them. I wanted to say something profound, something that would haunt them. But my brain was empty. I was just tired. "He loved me," I whispered. "You can take the money, but he loved me." Sabrina laughed, a sharp barking sound. "He left you a shack and $0, sweetie. That's not love, that's a severance package." I pushed the door open. The wind hit me instantly. It was a sheet of water. The storm had broken, and the rain was coming down in sheets sideways. Thunder rattled the window panes. "Go!" Gwendolyn commanded. I stepped out onto the porch. The wind almost knocked me over. I dragged the suitcase out, and the moment the wheels hit the wet stone, Gwendolyn slammed the door. The sound was final. Boom. Then, the distinct, heavy clack of the deadbolt sliding home. I stood there on the porch, sheltered slightly by the overhang, but the spray was already soaking my dress. I stared at the wood grain of the door. I waited. Part of me, the stupid, hopeful part, thought maybe they would open it. Maybe Gwendolyn would realize this was insane. Maybe she would throw me a coat. I waited for 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then I heard muffled laughter from inside. They were celebrating. I turned around and looked out at the driveway. It was a mile long, winding through the manicured grounds to the main gate. It was pitch black, illuminated only by flashes of lightning. I was alone. I pulled up the rideshare app on my phone. My fingers were wet and slippery, making the screen glitch. I typed in the address, searching for drivers. The little circle spun and spun. No cars available. I tried a taxi service. Same thing. Nobody was coming out to the High Court estate in a severe thunderstorm on a Friday night. The estate was too far from the city center, too secluded. That was why Cameron loved it. Now it was my prison. "Okay," I said aloud. My voice was lost in the roar of the rain. "Okay, I have to walk." I gripped the handle of the suitcase. The plastic was cracked and dug into my palm. I stepped off the porch and into the deluge. Instantly, I was soaked. My dress clung to my skin like a second layer of flesh, my hair plastered to my skull. The water was freezing. I gasped, the cold air filling my lungs, and started walking. The driveway was paved, but it was slick with oil and rain. The suitcase wheels rattled and skipped. One of them was jammed, so I was effectively dragging a 40-pound dead weight that screeched against the asphalt. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Every step was a battle. My shoes were flats, not made for hiking, and they slipped on the wet pavement. I fell once, scraping my knee hard. I just lay there on the asphalt for a second, letting the rain hammer against my back. I thought about just staying there. If I stayed there, maybe hypothermia would take me. It would be easier than facing the reality of tomorrow. But then I thought about Gwendolyn's face. I thought about Sabrina's laugh. If they found my body on their driveway tomorrow morning, they would just complain that I blocked the caterers. I forced myself up. Spite, I realized, was a powerful fuel. By the time I reached the main gate, my arm felt like it was being pulled out of its socket. The gate was closed. Of course. I had to squeeze through the pedestrian gap, dragging the suitcase sideways, tearing the fabric even more. I reached the main road. Cars were flying by, splashing waves of dirty water onto the shoulder. I started walking toward the lights of the highway miles away. I was crying, but the rain hid it. I was screaming inside my head. Why, Cameron? Why? You promised. You said you'd set everything up. You said I'd be safe. Was this the plan? For me to drown on the side of the road? It took me 3 hours to get to the city. I managed to flag down a pickup truck about a mile down the road, an older man who looked terrified of me but took pity on the soaked woman dragging a bag. He dropped me off at the downtown transit center. If the mansion was heaven, this place was the deepest circle of hell. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a sound that drilled into my skull. The air smelled of diesel fumes, stale urine, and wet dog. The floor was covered in a sticky film of grime. I walked to the ticket counter, trailing a puddle of water behind me. People stared. A woman with a baby pulled her child closer as I passed. I didn't blame her. I looked like a swamp creature. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my wallet out of my purse. I opened it. 2 $20 bills. That was it. That was my entire net worth. I had saved that $40. I had taken it out of the ATM 3 days ago because I wanted to buy a specific arrangement of white lilies for Cameron's grave next week. He loved lilies. Now, I was going to use his flower money to run away. Next, the clerk barked. He was behind a plexiglass shield, chewing gum with his mouth open. I need a ticket to Whispering Pines, Georgia, I said. My voice was raspy. I sounded like I had been smoking for 40 years. The clerk stopped chewing. He looked at me, then at his computer, then back at me. Whispering Pines? Bus don't go there, lady. The will said, I stammered, it's a town. It has to exist. Town exists, the clerk grunted. Bus route don't. It's off the main line, middle of nowhere. I felt the panic rising again, hot and sharp. Please, I have to get there. It's the only place I have. He sighed, annoyed that I was making him do his job. He typed something in. Closest I can get you is the junction. It's a drop-off point at the crossroads about 10 miles out. You'll have to find a ride from there. Fine, I said. How much? $38.50. I stared at him. $38.50. That left me with $1.50. I pulled the 2 damp bills out of my wallet and slid them under the glass. It felt like I was handing over a piece of my soul. Bus leaves in 10 minutes. Bay 4, he said, sliding the ticket and 6 quarters back to me. Don't lose it, no refunds. I took the ticket. It was flimsy paper, my lifeline. The bus was older than me. The seats were covered in a gray fabric that was stained with unidentifiable substances. The air conditioning was broken, so the air was hot, humid, and smelled of body odor and corn chips. I found a seat in the back near the bathroom. It smelled worse there, but I needed to be away from people. I shoved my suitcase between my legs and hugged my purse to my chest. As the bus lurched forward, leaving the city lights behind, I leaned my head against the cold, vibrating window. The vibration rattled my teeth. I closed my eyes and, against my will, the memory came. 6 months ago. The garden. Cameron was sitting on the stone bench, looking at the koi pond. He had just gotten the diagnosis that morning, glioblastoma. The word sounded like a weapon. I had sat next to him, terrified, grabbing his hand. "We'll fight it," I had said. "We'll go to the best doctors. We have the money." He had turned to me, his eyes intense, almost feverish. He gripped my hand so hard it hurt. "Ness," he had said, "listen to me. I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I whispered. "Things are going to get complicated," he said. "I'm going to have to make decisions that won't make sense to you, decisions that might hurt, that might look like I'm pushing you away." "What are you talking about?" "Just promise me," he insisted. "Whatever happens, whatever it looks like, trust me. Trust that I am playing the long game. Trust that I am protecting you." "I trust you," I had said. "I always trust you." I opened my eyes. The bus hit a pothole, jarring my spine. "Trust me." I looked at the water streaking across the glass. Was this protection? Leaving me penniless on a Greyhound bus to a shack in the woods? Was this the long game? Or had the tumor eaten away at his mind, making him paranoid and cruel? Maybe he hated me at the end. Maybe Gwendolyn had gotten to him. The doubt was worse than the cold. It was a worm eating its way through my heart. I wanted to believe him, but looking at my mud-stained reflection in the window, belief felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. "End of the line for the junction!" the driver shouted. I woke up with a start. My neck was stiff. It was light outside, a gray, misty dawn that made everything look washed out. I grabbed my bag and stumbled to the front. The bus hissed to a stop. I stepped down onto the gravel. The bus doors wheezed shut, and the vehicle pulled away, spewing a cloud of black exhaust in my face. I coughed and waved the smoke away. When it cleared, I looked around. "Oh no," I whispered. It wasn't a town. It wasn't even a station. It was literally a crossroads. Two-lane highways intersecting in the middle of endless fields of dead corn. There was one structure, a dilapidated gas station with boarded-up windows and a sign that said "Open" in flickering neon, though it looked anything but open. The clerk said it was a drop-off point, I muttered to myself. He didn't say it was the moon. I pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. I looked at the battery. 12%. I had no signal, no ride, no idea which direction Whispering Pines was, and I was standing on the side of a highway with a broken suitcase and $1.50 in my pocket. I looked at the gas station again. I saw movement inside, a shadow moving past the dirty glass. I took a deep breath. I had to go in there. I had to ask for help. And looking at the rusty bars on the windows, I had a feeling that asking for help out here was going to cost more than polite conversation. I gripped the suitcase handle. My hand was blistered. The hard way, I told myself. You have to do this the hard way. I started dragging the bag across the gravel lot toward the store. I pushed the door to the convenience store open. A bell jingled, a cheerful, annoying sound that clashed with the gloom inside. The place smelled of stale coffee and damp cardboard. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of dried tobacco leaves. He was reading a newspaper that looked 3 days old. He lowered the paper. His eyes narrowed. "We ain't got a public restroom, miss." I stood there, dripping water onto his linoleum floor. I must have looked like a lunatic. "I don't need a bathroom," I said. My voice was shaky. "I need directions. Do you know a place called Whispering Pines?" The man froze. He folded the newspaper slowly. "You mean the old Vance place? Down in the hollow?" "Yes," I breathed. "That's the one." He looked me up and down, taking in the expensive, now ruined dress and the broken suitcase. "Nobody goes down there. Place has been empty for 20 years. Roofs caved in. Roads washed out." "I have to go there," I said. "Please, just tell me which way." He hesitated. then pointed a gnarled finger toward the back wall. "Take the dirt road behind the pump. 3 miles. Fork left at the big oak. If you hear dogs, don't run." "Thank you," I said. I turned to leave. "Wait," he grunted. "You got water?" "No." He reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of lukewarm water. He slammed it on the counter. $1. I stared at the bottle. I had $1.50. If I bought this, I had 50 cents left to my name, but my throat was so dry it felt like sandpaper. I needed the water. "Okay," I whispered. I put the dollar bill on the counter. "Good luck," he muttered, not looking at me. "You're gonna need it." The walk was torture. The moment I stepped off the pavement onto the dirt road, the mud grabbed my shoes. It was that thick, red Georgia clay that acts like glue. About a mile in, disaster struck. I hit a root hidden in the mud. The suitcase lurched sideways and I heard a sharp snap. The handle broke off in my hand. I stood there in the middle of the woods, holding a piece of plastic, staring at the blue bag lying in the muck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit down in the mud and just give up. I looked at the canopy of trees overhead. No sun, just gray, dripping gloom. This is it, I thought. This is how I die, over a broken suitcase. But then I thought of Gwendolyn. I pictured her drinking her morning coffee, telling Sabrina how unfortunate it was that I disappeared. I dropped the broken handle. I bent down, grabbed the fabric strap on the side of the suitcase, and heaved. It was dead weight. I dragged it. Step, drag, step, drag. My shoulder burned. My shoes were ruined. I was covered in red clay. I kept checking my phone. 8%. The trees finally cleared, and I saw it. "Oh, God," I choked out. The lawyer had called it a homestead. Gwendolyn had called it a shack. Both were understatements. It was a carcass. The house was a 2-story Victorian that looked like it had been punched by a giant. The paint was gone, leaving gray, splintered wood. The porch roof sagged dangerously on the left side. Several windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned black with rot. The yard was a jungle of waist-high weeds and briars. I dragged the suitcase through the tall grass, thorns tearing at my legs. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get to the porch. I reached the steps. They groaned under my weight. I hauled the bag up step by agonizing step until I collapsed onto the wooden planks of the porch. I let go of the bag and just lay there on my back, staring at the porch ceiling. It was covered in wasp nests. My chest was heaving. I was lightheaded. He hated me, I thought. The realization hit me harder than the exhaustion. He didn't do this to protect me. He did this to punish me. Maybe I wasn't a good wife. Maybe I annoyed him. Maybe this is his final joke. I closed my eyes, tears mixing with the rain on my face. I was alone in a ruin with 50 cents and a dead husband who had sent me to hell. I lay there for 10 minutes, too weak to move. The wind shifted, blowing across the porch, and then I smelled it. It was faint but unmistakable, a sweet floral scent, clean, sharp. It didn't smell like rot or wet wood. It smelled like perfume. I opened my eyes. I turned my head to the right. There, in the corner of the porch, shielded from the wind by a pillar, was a terracotta pot, and growing inside it was a jasmine bush. It wasn't wild. It was pruned. The leaves were a glossy, vibrant green, and there were small white flowers blooming. I sat up slowly, my muscles screaming. I crawled toward it on my hands and knees. It was the only living, cared-for thing in this entire nightmare. A memory flashed in my brain, crisp and clear, 3 years ago. We were watching a movie about a bank heist. The characters buried the money in a cemetery. Cameron had laughed. He said, "Too cliché. If I ever have to hide the treasure, Ness, I'm putting it under the jasmine. Nobody suspects the jasmine." I had laughed. "Why jasmine?" "Because it's your favorite," he had said, "and because it covers the smell of the dirt." I stared at the pot. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Don't be stupid, I told myself. It's a plant. Birds drop seeds. It's a coincidence. But the pot wasn't cracked. The soil looked dark, like it had been watered recently. I reached out. My hand was trembling. I grabbed the rim of the heavy pot. Please, I whispered, please don't let me be crazy. I shoved the pot. It was heavy. I gritted my teeth and pushed with my shoulder. It scraped across the wood with a high-pitched screech. Underneath the pot, the wood wasn't gray. It was cleaner, and there was a loose board. I jammed my fingernails into the crack of the board and pried. A splinter drove itself under my thumbnail, sending a jolt of sharp pain up my arm. I ignored it. I pulled. The board popped up. I looked into the dark hole between the joists. Something glinted. I reached down. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I grabbed it and pulled it out. It was a key, a brass key, shiny and new, attached to a heavy keychain that looked like a small silver bear. I stared at the bear. I gave that to Cameron for his birthday 5 years ago. He said he lost it. He hadn't lost it. I looked at the front door of the house. It was secured with a heavy-duty padlock that looked brand new, contrasting with the rusty hasp. I scrambled to my feet. I ran to the door. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. Click. The padlock sprang open. I pulled the chain off and pushed the door. It stuck for a second, then swung inward with a groan. I stepped into the foyer. I expected the smell of rats. I expected mold. Instead, I was hit with a wall of scent that made my knees buckle. Pipe tobacco. Cherry vanilla pipe tobacco. It was stale, yes, but it was strong. It was the smell of Cameron's study in the mansion, the smell that clung to his sweaters. He had been here, recently. "Cameron?" I called out. My voice echoed in the empty house. "Cam?" Silence, just the creaking of the house in the wind. I pulled out my phone, 5% battery. "Okay," I said. "Okay, fast." I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom. The foyer was empty. Dust sheets covered furniture that looked like lumps of coal. Cobwebs hung from the chandelier like Spanish moss. But the floor... I looked down. In the thick layer of dust on the floorboards, there were footprints, a path. One set of footprints going back and forth, from the front door to a hallway on the right. I followed the tracks. I walked down the dark hallway, the floorboards whining under my feet. The footprints stopped at a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. I tried the handle, locked. I looked at the brass key in my hand. It was the only key I had. I slid it into the lock. It turned. I pushed the door open and shone the light inside. I gasped. This room wasn't a ruin. It was perfect. It was a study. There were no cobwebs, no dust sheets. A leather armchair sat behind a solid mahogany desk. Books lined the shelves. There was a Persian rug on the floor. It looked like he had just stepped out for a coffee. I walked to the desk. There was an ashtray. Inside was the charred remains of tobacco. I touched it. It was cold, but it was real. Why? Why would he fix up one room in a rotting house in the middle of nowhere? Why would he come here? I swung the flashlight beam around the room. It landed on the wall behind the desk. There was a painting. It was out of place. Everything else in the room was antique, old world. But this painting was a modern oil on canvas. It was the London Bridge. Gray sky, gray water, the bridge standing stoic in the middle. I walked around the desk. I knew this painting. We saw it in a gallery in New York on our honeymoon. I had stared at it for 20 minutes. Cameron had bought it while I was in the bathroom. He said he shipped it to storage. I reached out to touch the frame. I tried to straighten it. It looked slightly crooked. It didn't move. I frowned. I grabbed the side of the frame and pulled. It was bolted to the wall. Why bolt a painting to the wall in a secret study? I ran my fingers along the side of the frame. I felt a small bump. A latch. I pressed it. Click. The painting swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind the painting was a steel safe embedded in the wall. A digital keypad glowed faintly with a red light. My heart was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I looked at my phone. 3% battery. If the battery died, I had no light. Pitch black in a haunted house. Think, I hissed. Think, Vanessa. I needed a 6-digit code. I reached for the keypad. My finger hovered over the numbers. His birthday. August 15th, 1985. Oit fuav. Ein fiav. I typed it in. Beep, beep, beep. A red light flashed. Error. Damn it. I took a breath. My birthday. December 10th, 1988. 20. I typed it. Beep, beep, beep. Error. The little screen flashed a message. System lock in 2 attempts. My hands were sweating. If I locked it, I was done. I didn't have tools. I didn't have time. I looked around the room for a clue. A note? A sticky note? Nothing. Just the clean desk. Think like him. The long game. What mattered to him? The diagnosis date? No, too sad. The day he founded the company? No, he gave the company to his mother. I looked at the painting again. London. Why London? We went there for our honeymoon. The wedding. But everybody uses their wedding date. It's the first thing a thief would guess after birthdays. Cameron was paranoid about security. He used random number generators for his passwords. But he wanted me to open this. He had to pick a number I would know, but nobody else would associate with a security code. I closed my eyes. I remembered the night he proposed. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a special date. It was a random Tuesday. We were eating takeout on the floor of our first apartment. He looked at me and said, "I want to do this forever." I remembered the date because I wrote it in my journal. April 4th. 404, but I needed 6 digits. Wait, the jasmine. He said, "If I ever hide the treasure, it's under the jasmine." Was there a number on the pot? No. I looked at the keypad. 2% battery. The flashlight flickered. I was overthinking it. It had to be simple. He knew I would be panicked. He knew I would be exhausted. He wouldn't make it a riddle I had to solve with a math degree. The wedding date. I shook my head. It's too obvious. But then I remembered his voice in the garden. Whatever happens, trust me. Trust the simple things. The things that were just ours. Gwendolyn didn't care about our wedding. She hated it. She refused to pay for the photos. She probably didn't even know the date. To her, it was just the day she lost control of her son. To us, it was everything. May 20th, 2018. 5/18. I lifted my trembling hand. I held my breath. I closed my eyes. Beep! A solid long tone, then the mechanical thunk of heavy bolts sliding back. The safe door popped open an inch. I grabbed the handle and pulled it open just as my phone flashlight died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The darkness was absolute. When the flashlight died, it was like a hood had been thrown over my head. I froze, my hand still gripping the cold steel handle of the safe. The only sound was my own jagged breathing and the rain hammering against the roof 2 stories up. I reached into the safe blindly. My fingers brushed against the metal floor. It was cold. I felt plastic, crinkly, a water bottle. I felt cardboard, a box of crackers, and then paper, a thick, textured envelope. I pulled them out, clutching them to my chest like they were diamonds. I needed to see. I couldn't read the papers in the dark, and I didn't want to risk moving and tripping over the furniture. "Think," I whispered. He was a smoker. He smoked a pipe. I dropped to my knees and patted the surface of the desk. My hand hit the heavy glass ashtray. I swept my fingers around it. Wood, the smooth grain of the mahogany. Then, a small cardboard box. I grabbed it. Shake. The rattle of matches. I pulled a match out and struck it against the side of the box. Fzzzt. A flare of yellow light erupted, blinding me for a second. I held the match up, guarding the flame with my trembling hand. The shadows in the room danced wildly. I looked at the envelope in my lap. It was simple, brown, sealed with a piece of tape. I ripped it open with my teeth. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a confession, it was a flight itinerary. Passenger: Mrs. Vanessa Vance. From Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson, ATL. To London Heathrow, Han Alex. Class: First a suite. Departure: tomorrow, 08:30 am. I stared at the date. Tomorrow. That meant... I checked my internal clock. It was nearly midnight now. The flight was in 8 hours. The match burned down to my fingers. Ouch! I dropped it. Darkness returned. I sat there in the pitch black, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. London? Why London? We had no family in London. Cameron had a satellite office there for Stellar Industries, but it was tiny, a mailing address. And then I realized the precision of it. He knew the date of the will reading. He calculated the eviction. He estimated the travel time to this house. He knew I would find the safe. And he booked the flight for the very next morning. This wasn't an escape plan. It was an extraction. I needed to get to the airport. It was a 3-hour drive. I had no car. I had no phone. And I was sitting in a haunted house in the middle of a thunderstorm. I grabbed the water bottle. It was lukewarm, and cracked the seal. I chugged half of it in one go. My throat screamed in relief. I tore open the package of crackers. They were stale, but I forced them down. Fuel, I told myself. You are a machine. Eat, move. I needed my phone. I needed to call a cab, an Uber, anything. But the battery was dead. Electricity, I muttered. Please, Cameron, tell me you paid the bill. I lit another match. I crawled under the desk. The dust was thick here, choking me. I saw a power strip plugged into the wall. A little red light on the switch was glowing. Power. I almost cried. I dug my charger out of my purse. Thank God I hadn't left it in the suitcase, and plugged it in. I connected the phone. The screen remained black. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The silence of the house began to press in on me. The floorboards creaked above my head. Was that a squirrel? Or was someone walking? Gwendolyn. Did she send someone to make sure I was gone? Paranoia is a cold thing. I huddled under the desk, clutching the dead phone, imagining headlights sweeping across the front window, imagining Sabrina laughing as she lit a match to the old wood. Bzzzt. The Apple logo appeared. White light flooded the space under the desk. I watched the battery icon. 1%. As soon as the phone booted up, it vibrated violently. A flood of notifications. Most were from random numbers, probably press or friends who heard the gossip. I ignored them. One text message was at the top. It had arrived 4 hours ago. Sender: unknown, +44 country code. Message: your husband made arrangements. Do not bring the luggage. Do not bring the past. Bring only the ID and the ticket. We are waiting for you in London. The code is the day you began. I read it 3 times. We are waiting. Not I, we. Who was we? Lawyers, mercenaries? Or was this a trap? I looked at the code is the day you began part. The wedding date. It confirmed everything. The person on the other end knew about the safe. They knew the code. They knew I was here. And they said, do not bring the luggage. I thought about the broken suitcase sitting on the porch, my college sweatshirts, the jeans I wore on our first date, the tangible history of Vanessa Vance, the girl from Georgia. Do not bring the past, I whispered. I understood. If I walked out that door with that suitcase, I was still the victim. I was the evicted widow dragging her trash. I looked at the flight time. 8:30 am. It was now 12:45 am. I stood up. I dusted off my knees. I grabbed the envelope, my passport, which I always kept in my purse, and the water bottle. I walked out of the study. I walked down the hall, through the foyer, and out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and misty. I looked at the blue suitcase. It looked like a dead body lying there. I left it. I didn't look back. I walked down the steps, past the Jasmine, and into the mud. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a ticket to a foreign country. It was terrifying. It was liberating. The walk back to the junction was harder than the walk in. My legs were jelly. The mud was slippery. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I missed that flight, the door closed forever. I reached the gas station at 2:30 a.m. It was closed. The lights were off. I stood under the flickering street lamp at the crossroads, a ghost in a ruined designer dress. I needed a ride. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 20 minutes. Then headlights. A beat-up sedan slowed down. I stepped into the light, waving my arms. Please don't be a serial killer. Please don't be a serial killer. The car stopped. The window rolled down. It was a teenager, maybe 19, wearing a fast food uniform. He looked terrified. I need to get to the airport, I said. I tried to sound authoritative, but my teeth were chattering. I'll pay you. The airport? He squeaked. Lady, that's in Atlanta. That's miles away. I know. I'll give you $100, I lied. I had 50 cents. He looked at my muddy dress. He looked at my wild eyes. I can take you to the bus depot in Macon. It's on my way home. Fine, I said. Macon. Go. I got in. The car smelled of French fries. At the bus depot in Macon, I had to do the hardest thing I've ever done. I got out of the kid's car. Where's the money? He asked. I swallowed the bile in my throat. I don't have it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His face fell. He didn't get angry. He just looked disappointed. Man, he sighed. That sucks, lady. He drove off. I felt like garbage. I promised the universe I would find him and pay him back 10 times over. I ran to the taxi stand. There was one cab driver asleep in his car. I banged on the window. He woke up with a snort. Atlanta Airport, I said. International Terminal? He looked at me. Up front, he grunted. Fixed rate, 200. I lost my wallet, I said, leaning in. But I have a husband waiting for me there with cash. He's rich. He'll give you 300. Please, it's an emergency. The driver looked at my mud-caked shoes. He looked at the desperation radiating off me. Get in, he sighed. But if he ain't there, I'm calling the cops. I got in. I closed my eyes and prayed that we included someone with a wallet. The international terminal was gleaming white and sterile. I walked through the automatic doors at 6:15 a.m. I was a stain on the scenery. People in suits moved away from me. Families pulled their luggage closer. I caught my reflection in a glass panel. My hair was a bird's nest. My face was streaked with mud and mascara. My dress was torn at the hem. I walked straight to the first-class counter for British Airways. The line was empty. The agent was a woman with perfect blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she saw me approaching, the smile vanished. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone said, "Security is 10 feet away." "Checking in for Vance," I said. I slapped my passport on the counter. My hands were black with dirt. She picked up the passport with 2 fingers, like it was radioactive. She typed on her keyboard, frowning. "I see the reservation," she said slowly. "Mrs. Vanessa Vance, first class to London." She looked at me. She looked at the screen. "And your luggage?" "No luggage," I said. Her eyebrows shot up. "No checked bags? For an international flight? And no carry-on?" "Just me," I said. She stared at me. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some additional identification, and I'll need you to step aside for a security assessment." "Why?" I demanded. "I have a ticket. I have a passport." "Because," she lowered her voice, "this fits a profile. One-way ticket, cash booking, no luggage, distressed appearance." She reached for the phone. My heart stopped. If she called security, I would be detained. I would miss the flight. Gwendolyn would find me. "Please," I whispered, "just check the notes. My husband said everything was arranged." "I'm calling my supervisor," she said coldly. A minute later, a man in a navy suit walked over. He looked serious. He took the passport, looked at the screen, and typed in a code. His eyes widened slightly. He looked at me. The disgust was gone, replaced by confusion, respect. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "my apologies. This reservation is flagged as highly sensitive." He turned to the agent. "Print the boarding pass. Issue the VIP lounge pass. Do not weigh her purse." "But sir," the agent started. "Now," he ordered. He handed me my passport and the boarding pass. "We have alerted the flight crew to your situation. You will not be disturbed." I took the ticket. My hands were shaking. "Thank you." I walked through security. The TSA agents gave me hell, patting me down twice because of the mud on my clothes. But the boarding pass acted like a shield. I made it to the VIP lounge. The sliding glass doors opened into a world of quiet luxury, soft jazz, the smell of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Men in Italian suits sat reading the Financial Times. I walked in. The silence that fell over the room was immediate. Every head turned. I kept my chin up. "I own this," I told myself. "I am Mrs. Vance. I am the widow. I am the survivor." I walked straight to the private shower suites. I locked the door behind me and collapsed against it. I slid down to the floor and let out a sob that had been trapped in my chest for 12 hours. I crawled to the sink and pulled myself up. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was terrifying. Her eyes were bloodshot and sunken. Her skin was pale. There was dried mud in her hairline. But there was something else, too. The soft, scared girl who used to ask Gwendolyn for permission to speak? She was gone. She died in the rain on the porch. The woman in the mirror looked like she had crawled out of a grave to settle a score. I turned on the hot water. I stripped off the ruined dress. I scrubbed the Georgia red clay off my skin until I was raw. I washed the mud out of my hair. I didn't have fresh clothes. I had to put the torn, damp black dress back on, but I wrapped the shawl, Cameron's shawl, around my shoulders like armor. I unlocked the door. I walked out to the buffet, took a green apple and a bottle of sparkling water, and sat in a leather armchair by the window. I watched the planes taxiing on the runway. "I'm coming, London," I whispered, "and I'm bringing hell with me." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Chloe, looked at my muddy dress, then at my ticket, and then at my face. She didn't flinch. That's the thing about first-class service. They are paid to ignore the fact that you look like a fugitive. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Vance," she said, guiding me to seat 1A. It wasn't a seat, it was a suite. Sliding doors, a bed, a television screen the size of a windshield. I sat down on the leather. It was soft, smelling of expensive conditioner. I felt like a disease infecting the cabin. I tucked my dirty feet under the seat, terrified of staining the carpet. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Champagne?" Chloe asked. I almost laughed. Champagne. The last time I saw champagne, Gwendolyn was drinking it while I packed my life into a trash bag. "Water," I croaked. "And, do you have a charger?" "There is a wireless pad right there, madam." I placed my phone on the pad. It buzzed. 15%. As the plane taxied, I closed my eyes. I thought about the taxi driver in Atlanta. I hadn't found a rich husband at the curb to pay him. I had panicked. When we pulled up and I realized nobody was there, I did the only thing I could do. I pulled off my wedding ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, the one thing Gwendolyn hadn't confiscated because it wasn't company property. I gave it to him. "It's worth $2,000, I had told him, my voice shaking. "Keep the change." He had looked at me with pity and taken it. Now, as the engines roared and gravity pushed me back into the seat, I rubbed the empty spot on my finger. I felt naked. I felt lighter. I was flying into the void. I had no idea who we was. I had no idea if I was going to prison or a palace. But as the plane punched through the cloud layer and the sun hit my face for the first time in days, I realized I didn't care. I was alive, and for the first time in 5 years, Gwendolyn wasn't watching me. Heathrow was a sensory assault. The lights were too bright. The accents were sharp. I walked through the terminal like a zombie clutching my passport. I cleared customs. The officer stamped my passport with a heavy thud. "Welcome to the UK, Mrs. Vance." I walked out into the arrivals hall, a sea of people holding signs. I stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if nobody was there? What if this was a prank? What if I was stranded in London with $0 and no ring to barter? Then I saw him. He was standing near the back, away from the chaotic cluster of Uber drivers. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him like armor. He had silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He held a discreet iPad, on the screen in elegant font. Mrs. Vance. I walked toward him. He saw me, saw the torn dress, the shawl, the exhaustion. He didn't look disgusted. He looked relieved. He stepped forward and gave a slight bow. Not a mockery, a genuine sign of respect. "Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, British. "I am Arthur Sterling. I was your husband's personal solicitor for his European affairs." "You sent the text?" I asked. "I did." He gestured to the side. "The car is this way. We have a lot to discuss and very little time to do it." He led me to a side exit. A black Range Rover with tinted windows was waiting. The driver opened the door. I hesitated. "Mr. Sterling," I said, planting my feet, "I have no money. I have no clothes. I don't know what's going on. If this is some game Gwendolyn is playing—" Sterling stopped. He turned to me. His eyes were kind but hard. "Gwendolyn Vance does not know I exist," he said softly. "She believes the world ends at the American border. Your husband knew better. Please get in. You are not a victim here, Vanessa. You are the boss." "The boss?" I got in the car. We drove into the city in silence. The rain in London was different, finer, colder. We pulled up to a glass needle of a building near the Shard. "The penthouse," Sterling said as the private elevator rocketed upward. "Cameron bought it 2 years ago, under a shell company. It is fully paid for. It is in your name." The doors opened. I stepped out onto a floor of white marble. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. The view of London was staggering, gray and majestic, but I didn't care about the view. I cared about the laptop sitting on the glass desk in the center of the room. "He left a video," Sterling said. "He recorded it 3 days before he died. He made me promise not to show it to you until you were standing in this room, safe." I walked to the laptop. My hand hovered over the space bar. "I'll be in the kitchen," Sterling said, stepping away. "Take your time." I pressed play. Cameron's face filled the screen. He looked terrible. Pale, gaunt, tubes in his nose. He was sitting in a hospital bed, but his eyes were burning with that intense intelligence I had fallen in love with. "Hey, Ness," he rasped. I let out a sob. I covered my mouth. "If you're seeing this," Video Cameron said, "it means you made it. It means you found the key, you cracked the safe, and you got on the plane. I knew you could do it. You're stronger than you think." He coughed, wincing. "I know you hate me right now. I know I left you with nothing in Atlanta. I know Gwendolyn threw you out. I know because I orchestrated it." He leaned into the camera. "Ness, listen to me. The U.S. company, Stellar Industries, it's a corpse. It's been dead for 2 years. The market shifted and we were bleeding cash. But I kept up appearances. I took out massive loans, huge predatory loans, using the U.S. assets as collateral. The mansion, the cars, the factory, they are all mortgaged to the hilt." My jaw dropped. "I took that loan money," he continued, a mischievous grin appearing on his sick face, "and I didn't put it back into the U.S. company. I legally, very carefully, invested it into a new entity. CV Global. Based here, in London, in your name. I left the U.S. assets to my mother and Sabrina because they wanted the crown. They wanted the title. Well, I gave it to them. I gave them the debt. I gave them the sinking ship. And because they are greedy, arrogance-blinded fools, they accepted the inheritance without auditing the books. He paused. The loans mature in 48 hours, Ness. The banks are going to call the debt. Stellar Industries is going to implode. And you are untouchable. You are the sole owner of CV Global. You are worth £50 million, free and clear. He teared up. I couldn't tell you. If you knew, you couldn't have faked the grief. Gwendolyn had to believe you were beaten. She had to kick you out. It was the only way to get you out of the blast radius. I love you, Vanessa. Now dry your eyes, put on the suit Sterling bought for you, and watch them burn. The screen went black. I didn't sleep. I spent the next 24 hours in that penthouse with Sterling. It wasn't a makeover montage, it was boot camp. Sign here, Sterling said, sliding a document across the table. This authorizes the transfer of the final tranche of funds from the Cayman accounts. I signed. Read this, he ordered, handing me a dossier on the U.S. loans. Understand what is about to happen. I read it. The terms were brutal. Immediate repayment upon death of the guarantor or seizure of assets. I showered. I washed the last of the Georgia mud down the drain. Sterling had hired a stylist who brought a rack of clothes. No flowery dresses, no soft knits. I chose a navy blue power suit. Sharp shoulders, tailored waist. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like Vanessa the widow. I looked like a CEO. One more thing, Sterling said, checking his watch. It was 6 p.m. in London, 1 p.m. in Atlanta. What? The banks in Atlanta. They have tried to contact Gwendolyn regarding the maturity of the loans. She has ignored their calls because she is busy planning her victory gala for tonight. She's having a party, I asked, incredulous. A massive one, Sterling confirmed, to celebrate her new ownership. The banks have decided to escalate. They are sending a foreclosure team to the estate this evening. During the party, I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction tighten in my stomach. Can we watch? I asked. Sterling smiled, a shark smile. I have access to the estate's security system. Cameron never gave Gwendolyn the master codes. We pulled up the feed on the giant TV screen. It was grainy, but the audio was crisp. The High Court estate was lit up like Christmas. Waiters were circulating with trays. A jazz band was playing. There she was, Gwendolyn. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight, holding a microphone. Sabrina was next to her, draped in white fox fur, looking like a mob wife. Friends, Gwendolyn shouted into the mic. Her voice echoed in my London penthouse. Thank you for coming to celebrate a new era, an era of strength. We have trimmed the fat. I knew she meant me. And now Stellar Industries will shine brighter than ever. The crowd clapped. Then at the edge of the frame, I saw movement. The main gates swung open. Not for a guest, 3 black SUVs rolled up the driveway. Behind them, 2 tow trucks and a police cruiser. Here we go, Sterling whispered. The music faltered. The SUVs stopped right in the middle of the courtyard, blocking the view of the fountain. Men in suits got out. They weren't party guests. They were foreclosure agents. Gwendolyn stomped down the stairs. I could hear her screeching. Excuse me, this is a private event. Who do you think you are? A man stepped forward. He handed her a stack of papers. Gwendolyn Vance? He asked loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I'm representing the creditor consortium. We are executing a writ of immediate possession for this property and all movable assets due to default on the Stellar commercial loans. Default? Gwendolyn laughed, a high, hysterical sound. We own everything. My son left me everything. He left you the debt, ma'am, the agent said, and you accepted it. Please vacate the premises. We have orders to secure the assets. That includes the jewelry you are wearing if it was purchased with company funds." "No!" Sabrina screamed as a tow truck driver started hooking up her new Porsche. "That's mine." "It's corporate property, miss," the driver yelled back. The guests started to scatter. It was chaos. People were running to their cars to avoid being associated with the disaster. Gwendolyn was physically fighting an agent who was trying to put a seized sticker on the front door. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gwendolyn. She must have realized the reality. Gwendolyn: "Vanessa, honey, pick up. There's been a misunderstanding. We need to access the offshore accounts. Cameron must have given you a code. Call me. We are family." I looked at the message. Toxic benevolence until the bitter end. She didn't want to apologize. She wanted a lifeboat. I typed a reply. Me. "I'm sorry, Gwendolyn. Cameron knew you weren't business-minded. He wanted to protect you from the stress of wealth. Enjoy the fresh start." I hit send. Then I blocked her number. I watched for another hour. I watched as Gwendolyn was escorted off the property in handcuffs because she tried to bite a police officer. I watched as Sabrina sat on the curb, weeping into her fur coat as her car was towed away. I watched as the lights in the mansion were turned off, one by one. The house went dark. I stood up. I walked to the window of the penthouse. London was glittering below me. A city of millions. A city where nobody knew my name and nobody judged me. "Are you all right, Mrs. Vance?" Sterling asked. I touched the cold glass. I thought about the jasmine plant. I thought about the mud. I thought about the ring I gave to the taxi driver. "I'm not Mrs. Vance," I said. Sterling looked confused. "I'm Vanessa," I said. "Just Vanessa, and I'm going to be fine." I turned away from the window. "Mr. Sterling," I said. "Let's order dinner. I'm starving." So life is different. Stellar Industries in the U.S. filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It's gone, dissolved. The mansion was sold at auction to a tech billionaire who painted it pink. Gwendolyn and Sabrina are currently living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a strip mall complex in Alabama. I know this because Sterling keeps tabs on them. Gwendolyn is suing everyone. The banks, the lawyers, the ghost of her son. She has no money for legal fees, so she represents herself. It's going as well as you'd expect. Sabrina opened an OnlyFans. As for me, I stayed in London. I'm learning the business. It turns out I'm actually pretty good at it. I'm not ruthless like Gwendolyn, but I'm careful. I listen. I went back to the airport taxi stand last week. I found the driver who took my ring. His name is Ahmed. I tried to give him 10,000 pounds. He refused. He tried to give me the ring back. I told him to keep it. I told him that ring belonged to a girl who died in a storm in Georgia. I bought myself a new ring, a simple silver band. I bought it with my own money, from my own salary. Sometimes, late at night, I still smell pipe tobacco in the penthouse. I like to think Cameron is here, sitting in the corner, laughing at the chaos he caused. He kept his promise. He protected me. But he was wrong about one thing. He didn't save me. I saved myself. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.